The shuttle touched down on Kepler 442b with all the grace of a dropped toolbox, which seemed appropriate given that Dr. Alan Voss's life had recently achieved similar levels of elegance. Through the viewport, the planet looked like Mars had gone through a goth phase, endless rust-colored plains beneath a perpetually bruised sky, the kind of place where hope went to fill out resignation paperwork. "Welcome to scenic Kepler 442b, the pilot announced without enthusiasm. Local time is who cares o'clock, gravity is .92 Earth standard, and the settlement's that depressing cluster of prefabs at 3 o'clock. Try not to die of boredom before you finish your contract." Alan grabbed his duffel and Bert's carrying case, careful not to jostle the survey drone too much. The last time he'd done that, Bert had spent an hour reciting what it claimed was Shakespeare but was actually dialogue from a 21st century soap opera. The drone's AI had degraded somewhere between here and Earth, picking up cultural artifacts from its databanks like a senile professor quoting random textbooks. The colony greeted him with the aesthetic charm of a parking garage designed by pessimists. Prefabricated buildings squatted in the red dust like metallic mushrooms, connected by pressurized walkways that had seen better decades. Miners trudged between facilities with the posture of people who'd stopped pretending to care about anything except payday. A flickering holographic sign declared, "Kepler 442b Mining Initiative, building tomorrow, today," with the kind of forced enthusiasm that suggested tomorrow had filed a restraining order. Alan made his way to the administration building, where a woman who looked like she'd been mainlining coffee for 3 consecutive shifts glanced up from a terminal. "Voss? The exobiology guy? That's me. Russo. Colony administrator." She didn't offer a handshake, which was fine because neither did he. "You're here to catalog microbial life in the caves. Thrilling work. I'm aware. You know why nobody else wanted this assignment. I can guess. Good. Saves me the orientation speech." She tapped her terminal, and a holographic map bloomed in the air between them, showing the colony perched above a network of caves that spread beneath the surface like frozen lightning. The Whisper Galleries. Unmapped, unstable, and apparently full of acoustic anomalies that drive people a little nuts. Perfect for someone looking to disappear. Alan didn't ask how she knew. His reputation had preceded him, the researcher who'd published findings on Titan that turned out to be contamination from his own lab equipment, triggering a cascade of retracted papers and professional humiliation. Earth had been happy to see him go. The feeling was mutual. "Quarters are in Block 7. Survey equipment's in the depot. Try to check in every 48 hours so we know you haven't fallen down a hole. Touching concern. We're required to care up to a point. After that point, it's paperwork." Russo's smile had all the warmth of vacuum. "Good luck, Dr. Voss." His quarters turned out to be a metal box with a cot, a desk, and a hygiene unit that hummed ominously. Alan unpacked Bert and activated the drone, watching as it booted up with a series of cheerful beeps. "Good morning, Dr. Voss." Bert's voice synthesizer had developed an oddly chipper quality, like a children's show host who'd seen too much. "Shall we begin our exciting survey of microscopic organisms in dark, potentially hazardous cave systems? Your enthusiasm is noted. I contain multitudes. Speaking of which, did you know that in the year 1997, a television program called Friends addressed the complex social dynamics of..." "Bert, please don't." Noted. Suppressing cultural references. Mostly. 3 days into the assignment, Alan descended into the Whisper Galleries for the first time. The cave entrance yawned at the edge of the colony like a mouth that had forgotten how to close, and the moment he stepped inside, he understood the name. Every sound, his breathing, his footsteps, the whir of Bert's rotors, came back wrong, twisted into syllables that almost formed words. It was like the caves were trying to speak but had forgotten the language. Acoustically fascinating, Bert observed, floating ahead with scanning lights active. Also deeply unsettling. "I'm detecting unusual mineral formations and what my sensors insist is organized geometry, which is statistically improbable in natural cave systems. Alan followed the drone deeper, his suit lights cutting through darkness that felt older than it should. The rock here was wrong, too smooth in places, too angular in others, as if nature and something else had argued about the architecture and reached an uncomfortable compromise. Hours passed. His water ran low. The heat, the exertion, the maze of passages that twisted back on themselves. By the time he found the chamber, Alan's judgment had been compromised by dehydration and the peculiar confidence that comes from being too tired to care about consequences. The chamber shouldn't have existed. His light swept across walls carved with symbols that predated any human writing system, geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly, as if they were trying to fold space into uncomfortable shapes. And in the center, impossible and serene, a pool of water glowed with soft bioluminescence, pulsing like a heartbeat. Dr. Voss, Bert said carefully, my sensors are experiencing what I can only describe as an existential crisis. Nothing about this reads as naturally occurring. Alan approached the pool. His instruments screamed warnings in 7 different wavelengths. The water's surface rippled despite the still air, and the light beneath suggested depth that the chamber's dimensions couldn't accommodate. We should probably leave, Bert suggested. This has all the hallmarks of a bad decision origin story. But Alan was thirsty, and tired, and somewhere in his exhausted brain, the thought formed that if he was going to be exiled to the ass end of explored space, he might as well drink from the mysterious glowing pool. At least it would be interesting. The water tasted like light and electricity and memories that weren't his. It was cool, perfect, and the moment it touched his throat, Alan knew he'd made a terrible mistake. The chamber trembled. Dust rained from impossible heights. And from the walls, from the darkness, from somewhere both very close and impossibly distant, mechanisms older than human civilization ground to life with a sound like reality clearing its throat. Bert spun. Alan stumbled backward from the pool, water dripping from his chin, and watched as the darkness at the far end of the chamber began to move with purpose. Not the random shift of shadows but the deliberate rearrangement of reality, as if someone was stepping through a curtain that happened to be made of 3,000 years and several violated laws of physics. She emerged like a theorem proving itself, all elegant lines and barely contained fury. Her skin was the blue of Earth's oceans at twilight, luminous in the chamber's strange light, and her ears swept upward in graceful points that would have looked absurd on anyone less utterly commanding. She wore something between armor and formal wear, material that shifted between states of matter as if it couldn't decide what it wanted to be, and her eyes were molten gold, ancient and furious and fixed on Alan with the kind of attention usually reserved for laboratory specimens that had disappointed their creator. Do you have any idea, she said, her voice resonating in frequencies that made his teeth ache, what you just did? Alan opened his mouth. His brain, still processing the taste of alien starlight and the fact that a blue woman had just materialized from nowhere, failed to produce anything useful. Bert, hovering at his shoulder, filled the silence. If I may interject, we're very sorry for any inconvenience. My operator is experiencing what I believe humans call shock and possibly ontological crisis. Would you like to file a complaint? I can provide the appropriate forms, assuming they exist in this context. The woman's gaze shifted to the drone, and something flickered across her face that might have been surprise or possibly offense that a floating metal sphere was speaking to her. You brought a commentary device to a sealed archive. Wonderful. Humanity's gift to the cosmos continues to impress. I'm a survey drone, Bert said with what Alan could only interpret as wounded dignity. Model Bert 7, though the acronym has been lost to bureaucratic incompetence. I provide scientific analysis and, apparently, mediation services. Bert, Alan managed, finding his voice, maybe don't negotiate with the angry glowing woman. Someone should. The drone rotated to face him. You certainly aren't contributing productively to this situation. The woman, because Alan's brain refused to process her as anything else despite evidence suggesting she was considerably more complicated, moved closer with steps that seemed to bend space slightly, covering distance faster than momentum should allow. She stopped just beyond arm's reach, studying him with an intensity that made him feel like she could see through skin to the disappointed skeleton beneath. "My name is Caliph Vor," she said, each syllable precise and weighted. I was, a keeper of the Sci-Fi, tasked with maintaining this archive for a duration that has apparently exceeded my civilization's entire existence. And you, with your dehydrated monkey brain and complete absence of survival instinct, just drank from a memory reservoir. A what? Memory reservoir. Genetic archive. Consciousness backup. Pick whichever translation your primitive neural architecture can accommodate. She gestured at the pool, which had stopped glowing and now looked like ordinary water, which somehow made everything worse. That was not refreshment. That was the compressed historical and biological record of my entire species, stored in quantum-suspended solution, and you contaminated it with your DNA while simultaneously ingesting enough Sci-Fi genetic memory to rewrite portions of your cerebral cortex. Alan processed this. So I'm going to die. Eventually, like everything. Kalitha's expression suggested she was considering accelerating the timeline. More immediately, you're going to experience what we called memory bleed. Fragments of my memories, my knowledge, my very consciousness are now tangled with yours. You'll start seeing things that never happened to you. Feeling emotions about events you never experienced. Understanding languages you never learned. That sounds unpleasant. Disorienting. Like having a roommate in your head who resents your existence. Yes to all of that. She turned away, pacing the chamber with agitation that manifested as small distortions in the air around her. But that's not the real problem. There's a worse problem. There's always a worse problem. That's practically a universal constant. Caliph stopped at the wall, touching symbols that began to glow at her contact. This archive wasn't just storage. It was a prison. And your act of cosmic stupidity activated the fail-safe protocol. Bert drifted closer to the symbols, scanning. I'm detecting a countdown mechanism. Approximately 7.3 planetary rotations until something reaches full activation. That seems ominous. Your machine has excellent intuition for existential threats. Caliph pulled her hand away, and the symbols dimmed. The Sci-Fi were an advanced civilization, Dr. Voss. We mapped galaxies, engineered ecosystems, and eventually made the mistake that all advanced civilizations make, we tried to weaponize time itself. What lies beneath this chamber, sealed by the very technology you just compromised, is called the Devourer of Hours. That's a terrible name. We weren't feeling creative. We were too busy being horrified. She turned back to him, and for a moment, her anger gave way to something older and more tired. It's a temporal weapon. It feeds on time, consuming moments and leaving gaps where causality used to be. We created it to win a war, then realized some wars shouldn't be won. So we imprisoned it here, in this forgotten corner of space, with me as eternal warden. And now you've begun its awakening. Alan sat down on the chamber floor because his legs had stopped being interested in supporting him. Can we stop it? I appreciate the optimism. Caliph walked over and crouched before him, her golden eyes level with his. Yes, possibly, if we're clever and lucky and you don't do anything else catastrophically stupid, which I'm not confident about based on current evidence. The contamination works both ways. Your biology is now the key to resealing the prison. Your specific genetic signature, corrupted by Sci-Fi memory patterns, can interface with the archive systems in ways neither pure human nor pure Sci-Fi could. So I'm useful. You're necessary. It's not the same thing. She stood, offering him a hand. Her skin was warm, almost feverish, and her grip suggested she could have crushed his bones if she'd wanted to. We have 7 planetary rotations to descend back into these caves, reach the Devourer's chamber, and perform a sealing ritual that will probably be unpleasant for both of us. Questions? Several thousand. Ask while we walk. We're going to your colony. She glanced at Bert. Can your device maintain discretion? I am a model of professionalism, Bert replied. Though I should mention that my cultural reference suppression systems are failing, and I may occasionally quote pre-colonial Earth media without warning. Perfect. I'm trapped with a contaminated human and a malfunctioning drone. This is exactly how I imagined my 3000th year. Caliph started toward the chamber exit, then paused. Also, Dr. Voss. If you drink anything else without my permission, I will personally ensure your next 7 days are memorably uncomfortable. Clear. Crystal. Good. Now let's go explain to your colony why you've returned with what they'll assume is an exotic alien companion, when really, I'm your only hope of not causing a temporal apocalypse. This should be entertaining. The walk back to the colony took 3 hours, during which Alan experienced his first memory bleed. One moment he was trudging through red dust behind Caliph, and the next he was standing in a city made of crystal towers that sang in the wind, watching 2 moons rise over forests where the trees grew upside down from floating islands. The vision lasted maybe 5 seconds, but it left him gasping, his knees weak, his mind trying to reconcile the absolute certainty that he'd lived in that place with the equally absolute knowledge that he'd never left Earth until 6 months ago. That was one of mine, Caliph said without turning around. My home city, Valian. It doesn't exist anymore, hasn't for 3 millennia, but your brain doesn't know that yet. It'll get worse before it gets better. Comforting. I'm not here to comfort you. I'm here to prevent temporal catastrophe. Different job description. Bert floated between them, sensors active. I'm detecting unusual neural activity in Dr. Voss's prefrontal cortex. Synaptic patterns that shouldn't be possible with human brain architecture. Fascinating and deeply concerning. Your machine has a gift for stating the obvious, Caliph said. Thank you. I've been working on it. The colony appeared on the horizon like a collection of discarded shipping containers that had given up on life. As they approached, Alan could see miners stopping their work to stare at Caliph, which was understandable given that blue women with pointed ears weren't standard issue on Kepler 442b. By the time they reached the administration building, they'd acquired an audience of approximately 20 people trying to look like they weren't staring while absolutely staring. Russo met them at the entrance, coffee cup in one hand, terminal in the other, her expression suggesting she'd encountered yet another problem she hadn't been paid enough to handle. Dr. Voss. You're back early. With a friend. Dar. Caliph Vor, Alan said, trying for casual and landing somewhere near panicked. Xenoarchaeologist from the Deep Survey Station at coordinates I absolutely know and could tell you if pressed. We don't have a Deep Survey Station. Different agency. Very classified. She was studying the caves independently and we ran into each other. Professional collaboration. Very boring academic stuff. Russo's eyes narrowed as she studied Caliph, who stood with the kind of regal composure that suggested she was accustomed to being studied and found it tedious. Your skin is blue. Your powers of observation are remarkable, Caliph replied. I'm from a colony with different atmospheric processors during development. Genetic adaptation. It happens. Your ears are pointed. Also genetic. Are we going to catalog all my physical features, or can Dr. Voss and I access the colony's research facilities? We've made some discoveries that require immediate analysis. Russo took a long drink of coffee, her expression suggesting she was calculating how much paperwork would be involved in various responses. Fine. But if this turns into a situation that requires me to file reports to corporate, I'm blaming both of you personally. Noted, Alan said. They escaped to his quarters before anyone could ask more questions. The moment the door sealed, Alan collapsed onto his cot while Caliph examined the space with the kind of disdain usually reserved for prison cells designed by enemies. These are your accommodations. Humanity has faster-than-light travel but apparently no standards for basic comfort. We spent the budget on the faster-than-light travel. Poor allocation of resources. She touched the wall, and a ripple of symbols appeared where her fingers made contact, the same geometric patterns from the cave, glowing faintly before fading. Your entire colony is built over the archive network. The Sci-Fi technology extends through the bedrock like roots. That's going to complicate things. Bert settled onto the desk, powering down non-essential systems. If I may ask, Ms. Vore, how long were you actually sealed in that chamber? 3,217 years, by your calendar. Give or take a few decades. Time gets imprecise when you're held in quantum suspension, waiting for something that might never happen. That's a very long time to be alone, the drone said quietly. Something flickered across Kalitha's face, surprise, maybe, that a machine had offered sympathy. Yes. It was. Which is why I'm particularly motivated to prevent this situation from requiring another 3 millennia of imprisonment. Once was enough. Alan sat up, fighting another wave of disorientation. So what's the plan? We wait 7 days and then go seal this thing. We prepare. The ritual requires specific conditions, and you need training to interface with Sci-Fi technology without accidentally deleting your consciousness or, worse, downloading too much of mine. She turned to face him fully. Also, I need to understand what's happening in this colony. My sensors registered temporal anomalies during our walk. Small ones, but growing. Time skips. Causality loops. The devourer is already beginning to wake, and it's affecting the area. As if summoned by the mention, the lights in Alan's quarters flickered. Not the usual brownout flicker of overtaxed power systems, but something stranger. The lights seemed to stutter, jumping forward and backward by fractions of seconds. On the desk, Bert's chronometer displayed 3 different times simultaneously before settling on one with apparent reluctance. That, Caliph said, is what I'm talking about. Alan's comm unit chirped. Russo's voice came through tense with confusion. Voss, we're getting reports of equipment malfunctions across the colony. Chronometers desynchronizing, surveillance footage showing people in 2 places at once, and 3 miners swear they just lived through the same 5 minutes twice. You know anything about this? He glanced at Caliph, who shook her head firmly. Probably just magnetic interference from the cave systems, Alan said. We'll look into it. You do that. And Voss. Keep your blue friend close. People are nervous enough without unexplained visitors during unexplained technical problems. The comm cut out. In the silence that followed, Alan heard something he hadn't noticed before, a low hum coming from everywhere and nowhere, like the colony itself was vibrating at a frequency just below normal hearing. Caliph heard it too, her expression tightened. It's accelerating, she said. The devourer is reaching for the surface faster than I calculated. We don't have 7 days. How long do we have? 5. Maybe 4 if it keeps accelerating. She moved to the window, looking out at the colony where miners continued their work, unaware that time itself was beginning to unravel beneath their feet. We need to go back into the caves tomorrow. Tonight, I teach you the basics of Sci-Fi neural interfacing, and you try not to have a psychotic break when more of my memories bleed into yours. And if I do have a psychotic break? Caliph turned from the window, and for the first time since emerging from the archive, she almost smiled. Then Bert will have to manage both of us, and none of us want that. I resent that assessment, the drone said. Though I acknowledge its accuracy. Another memory hit Alan without warning, not a vision this time but a feeling, ancient and vast. Loneliness like an ocean. Duty like a prison. Love that had turned to grief so old it had calcified into something harder than either. He gasped, clutching his head, and felt Kalitha's hand on his shoulder, steady and unexpectedly gentle. Breathe, she said. That was mine too. The day I volunteered to become a keeper. The day I said goodbye to everything I knew. Her voice was softer now. I'm sorry you have to carry that. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. Alan looked up at her, and in her golden eyes, he saw the weight of millennia and something else, a flicker of recognition, of understanding that came from sharing consciousness with someone whether either of them wanted it or not. "We're going to stop this thing," he said. "Yes," Caliph agreed. "We are. Even if I have to drag your contaminated human biology through every level of that archive to do it." They descended into the whisper galleries at what Caliph insisted was dawn, though Alan couldn't tell the difference between dawn and any other time on this perpetually twilight planet. Bert led the way with scanning lights active, navigating passages that had changed since Alan's last visit. The caves were rearranging themselves, subtle shifts in geometry that his instruments couldn't quite track but his borrowed Sci-Fi memories recognized instantly. "The archive is responding to the Devourer's awakening," Caliph said, moving through the darkness with confidence that came from having designed these systems 3,000 years ago. "It's trying to contain the breach, but it's fighting with outdated protocols and no keeper to guide it. Like watching your house try to save itself from fire using only the smoke detectors." Cheerful image. "I'm full of them. Wait until I tell you about the time my people accidentally created a self-aware plague that politely requested we stop trying to cure it." Alan stumbled over a rock formation that definitely hadn't been there before. Another memory bleed hit him mid-step, Calitha's hands working controls made of solidified light, her younger self concentrating on calculations that would seal her into isolation for millennia. The emotions came with it, determination, grief, a love for someone whose face he could almost see but not quite. The memory faded, leaving him dizzy. "You're getting them more frequently," Caliph said without turning around. "The closer we get to the Devourer's chamber, the more the temporal distortions amplify the connection between us. You'll be living through my entire history by the time we reach the bottom. Will I still be me when we're done?" She paused at a junction where 3 passages spiraled away into darkness. "Honestly? I don't know. This has never happened before. You're the first person stupid enough to drink from a Sci-Fi memory reservoir, so we're in uncharted territory. But I need you functional, which means I need you holding on to yourself. Think of it like this, my memories are guests in your head. Rude guests who didn't ask permission and won't leave, but still guests. You're the host. You get final say on who stays in control. That's surprisingly helpful advice. I contain depths. Also, turn left here. The right passage loops back on itself now, and the middle one leads to a temporal eddy that will age you 17 years in about 30 seconds. They chose left. Bert floated ahead, occasionally emitting worried beeps as its sensors registered phenomena that shouldn't exist. The drone had started quoting less and complaining more, which Alan took as a sign things were getting serious. "I'm detecting overlapping time streams," Bert announced. "We're in Tuesday but also somehow in Friday, and there's a non-zero chance we already did this yesterday. My chronometer is filing for philosophical asylum." The passage opened into a chamber that made Alan's vision bend. Space here had been negotiated between multiple versions of reality, and they'd reached an uncomfortable compromise. The walls showed fossilized time, moments trapped in stone, playing out in infinite loop. He saw a Sci-Fi technician checking instruments, the same motion repeated across the wall like frames of film stuck together. Another section showed starships arriving at a planet he recognized from Calitha's memories, each ship frozen in a different stage of landing, all occupying the same impossible space. This was a control nexus, Caliph said, running her hand along the walls without touching them. Keepers monitored the archive from here. After my civilization fell, it fell into temporal decay. Now it's less a room and more a concept that remembers being a room. I understand those words individually but not in that order. Welcome to advanced Sci-Fi technology. We stopped making sense around our 4th millennium of development. She gestured at a doorway that opened onto nothing, just blank darkness that felt older than darkness should. Through there. The Devourer's chamber is 3 levels down, but those levels exist perpendicular to normal space. Stay close, don't touch anything that's humming, and if you see yourself coming from the other direction, don't make eye contact. That last part was a joke, right? You'll find out. They stepped through the doorway, and Alan's stomach informed him that gravity was now a matter of opinion. They weren't falling so much as traveling through a direction that didn't technically exist, past chambers that flickered between states of reality. He caught glimpses of what the archive had been, vast halls filled with crystalline data structures, gardens growing plants from 100 different worlds, quarters where keepers had lived their lonely vigils. All of it was decaying now, crumbling into temporal fragments that couldn't decide which version of the past to commit to. Another memory slammed into him, stronger than before. He was Caliph, standing before a council of her people, volunteering for exile. He felt her certainty that this was necessary, her pride in being chosen, and underneath it all, the desperate hope that her mate Soravin would talk her out of it. But Soravin hadn't. Soravin had held her one last time and told her she was the bravest person he'd ever known, and that was worse than any argument because it meant he agreed this was necessary. Alan felt the moment her heart broke, felt it with such intensity that he gasped, tears streaming down his face without permission. Calitha's hand gripped his arm, steadying him. I know. That's the worst one. The memory I've tried to bury for 3 millennia, and now you get to experience it too. I'm sorry. He loved you. Yes. He died in the war 6 months after I entered suspension. I didn't know until your contaminated biology started accessing deeper memory archives. I got to mourn him 3,000 years too late, and that's its own special kind of torture. Her voice was steady, but her hand on his arm trembled slightly. Keep moving. We're almost there. The Devourer's chamber announced itself through wrongness. The passage opened into a space that hurt to perceive, like staring at a migraine made physical. At its center, something that wasn't quite visible writhed against bonds that weren't quite there, a wound in causality that fed on the moments around it. Alan could see time itself, rendered visible through corruption, a shimmering aurora of moments being consumed and regurgitated, events happening backward and forward simultaneously. There it is, Caliph said quietly. The thing we created and couldn't destroy. The weapon that won the war by making us realize we'd already lost it. Bert's sensors went haywire, the drone spinning in confused circles. I'm reading temporal gradients that suggest we've been here for both 3 seconds and 17 years. Also, according to my data, the chamber doesn't exist. Yet here we are. I'm experiencing cognitive dissonance, which shouldn't be possible for a machine. Join the club, Alan muttered. Caliph moved toward the center of the chamber, where a platform of solidified light still functioned despite the decay around it. Symbols covered its surface, glowing faintly, waiting for input. This is where we perform the sealing ritual. Your contaminated biology acts as a bridge between human and Sci-Fi genetic patterns, creating a unique signature that can reinforce the locks. But there's a cost. There's always a cost. What is it this time? She turned to face him, her golden eyes reflecting the twisted light from the Devourer. Memory. The locks require a sacrifice of personal history to anchor them. Someone has to offer up their past, literally feeding it into the prison system to strengthen the seal. I was prepared to do it alone, but your contamination changes things. The system might take from both of us now, or demand more from one. We won't know until we begin. And if we give up too much memory, then we forget who we are. We become blank templates walking around in borrowed skin. She stepped onto the platform. But if we don't do this, the Devourer escapes, and it consumes time across this entire sector until there's nothing left but causality collapsed into a single eternal moment. So, bad option versus catastrophic option. Welcome to Keeper Duties. Alan joined her on the platform. The symbols responded to his presence, brightening, rearranging themselves into patterns his human education couldn't parse but his stolen Sci-Fi knowledge understood perfectly. Instructions for sacrifice. A manual for giving up everything you were to protect everything that is. I'll do it, he said. Alan. I'm already contaminated. Already carrying your memories mixed with mine. I'm the bridge. Let me be the anchor too. Caliph stared at him, and for once, her mask of ancient composure cracked. You have no idea what you're offering. Maybe not. But I'm offering anyway. He placed his hands on the symbols, feeling them respond to his touch. Besides, what memories do I have worth keeping? A failed career? A life spent running from disappointment? If I have to lose some of that to save a few thousand miners and one very annoyed ancient alien, seems like a fair trade. You're an idiot. Yeah. But I'm your idiot now, apparently. Let's do this before I remember how much I usually hate making grand gestures. Alan placed his hands fully on the symbols and felt the platform respond like a living thing waking from surgery. Light spiraled up from the glyphs, wrapping around his wrists, and somewhere in the wrongness at the chamber's center, the devourer noticed. It turned its attention toward them, and Alan understood why Kalitha's people had been so terrified of their own creation. The thing didn't just consume time, it was hungry for it, ravenous, and it had been starving for 3,000 years. The ritual requires synchronization, Kalith said, placing her hands beside his. The symbols brightened further, responding to her genetic signature. We offer memory to the archive, and it weaves those memories into new locks. But here's what I didn't tell you, the Sci-Fi technology can't distinguish between willing and unwilling participants when they're this entangled. It's going to take from both of us. You could have mentioned that earlier. You would have argued, and we don't have time for your adorable human ethics debates. She closed her eyes as the light began to crawl up her arms too. Think of a memory you're willing to lose. Focus on it. The system will follow your intention and take that first. Alan tried to focus, searching through his mind for something expendable. His childhood home appeared, the kitchen where his mother had taught him to make terrible pancakes every Sunday. He felt the memories start to lift, like a photograph peeling away from an album, but then the system paused, confused by the Sci-Fi patterns woven through his neurons. It couldn't separate his memories from Kalitha's cleanly. They were too mixed, too thoroughly contaminated by each other. The platform made a sound like reality clearing its throat, then made a decision. It would take portions from both of them, weaving their memories together into something new, a hybrid anchor that was neither fully human nor fully Sci-Fi. Alan felt it begin. His mother's face fading but Kalitha's home city of Valiant solidifying in crystalline detail. He lost the memory of his first published paper but gained perfect recall of Sci-Fi genetic engineering principles. Kalith gasped beside him as the process worked in reverse for her, her memories being traded for his in an exchange neither of them controlled. It's creating something else, she said through gritted teeth. A third pattern. Not you, not me. Us. The devourer screamed without sound, thrashing against bonds that were suddenly reinforced by paradox, by memories that belonged to two beings simultaneously, creating logical impossibilities that even a temporal weapon couldn't consume. The chamber shook as the seal strengthened, fed by their combined histories, anchored by the unprecedented connection between human and Sci-Fi consciousness. Alan watched memories disappear like stars going out. He lost his first day at university. Gone. His dissertation defense. Gone. The face of his first love. Gone. But each loss came with a replacement, Kalitha's memories sliding into the empty spaces, filling him with her history. He felt her joy at discovering the principles of quantum suspension. Her terror during the war. Her last conversation with Sorovin, now playing in his mind with the intimacy of personal experience. Kalith was experiencing the same thing in reverse, he realized. She was losing pieces of her past and gaining his. The name of her homeworld sun disappeared, replaced by Alan's memory of Earth's moon rising over the Atlantic. Her mother's voice faded, but she gained his memory of arguing with his father about career choices. They were being blended, mixed, becoming something that had never existed before. I can't stop it, she said, her voice strained. The system is taking more than I calculated. Then let it. Alan squeezed her hand, their fingers now intertwined on the platform. If we're going to be stuck as each other's anchors, might as well commit to it. Bert, watching from a safe distance, provided commentary that managed to be both helpful and deeply unhelpful. Your neural patterns are synchronizing at an alarming rate. You're creating what I can only describe as a shared consciousness. This is either a breakthrough in interspecies cognitive merger or the most elaborate way two beings have ever become roommates. Possibly both. The light from the platform reached blinding intensity. The devourer made one final attempt to break free, reaching for them with tendrils of corrupted causality, but the new locks held. They were paradoxes made manifest, two beings who shared memories they'd never lived, two histories that had become one, two minds that could never fully separate again. The temporal weapon couldn't process it, couldn't consume what it couldn't understand, and in its confusion, it retreated back into dormancy. The ceiling completed with a sound like the universe sighing in relief. The light faded. Alan and Caliph collapsed onto the platform, still holding hands, both of them fundamentally changed by what they'd lost and what they'd gained. I don't remember my mother's face, Alan said quietly. I don't remember the name of my first teacher, Caliph replied. But I remember your father telling you that scientists who don't fail aren't trying hard enough. I remember that very clearly. And I remember Sorovin telling you that bravery and foolishness look identical until history decides which one you were. Alan sat up slowly, his body feeling like it belonged to someone else. We're really stuck with each other now, aren't we? Permanently and irritatingly, yes. But Caliph was almost smiling when she said it. The seal is stable. The devourer will sleep for another few millennia at least, and now it has a lock that can't be easily broken because breaking it would require separating memories that don't belong to any single person. They made their way back to the surface with Bert leading, the drone unusually quiet as it processed what it had witnessed. The colony was exactly as they'd left it, though several miners mentioned experiencing strange dreams about living other people's lives. Russo took one look at them and decided not to ask questions, which Alan appreciated. In his quarters that night, Alan sat with Caliph and tried to inventory what remained of himself. He was still Alan Voss, mostly. Still a scientist, still prone to making terrible decisions. But now he carried 3,000 years of Sci-Fi knowledge, memories of a civilization that had touched the stars and then chosen to step aside. He knew things he'd never studied, felt grief for losses he'd never personally experienced, and when he closed his eyes, he could see Crystal City singing in alien wind. This is going to be complicated, he said. Everything worth doing is. Caliph was examining her own hands as if seeing them for the first time. I remember your childhood now. That terrible house with the leaking roof. Your mother's pancakes that could have been used as construction material. It's absurd that I carry these things. And I remember Valian. The way the light hit the towers at sunset. The gardens where you first kissed Sorovin. Alan looked at her. We're a mess, aren't we? A functional mess. There's a difference. She met his eyes, and in them, he saw himself reflected, not just physically but cognitively, two minds that had become permanently entangled. You can't leave this planet now. You're part of the lock. We both are. I know. And honestly, I'm okay with that. Alan gestured at the window, at the red twilight planet that had become something like home. Better than Earth, anyway. Here I've got a purpose. An incredibly weird purpose involving being a living lock for an ancient time weapon, but still a purpose. Bert powered on from the desk. If I may offer unsolicited commentary, you two have achieved what could be considered either the most intimate relationship possible or the most elaborate form of mutual haunting. As your only witness, I'm choosing to interpret it positively. Thanks, Bert. You're welcome. Also, the colony administrator is requesting your presence tomorrow to discuss the recent temporal anomalies and why they've mysteriously stopped. I suggest you prepare a creative explanation that involves minimal truth. Caliph laughed, a sound Alan had never heard from her before, light and genuine and entirely unexpected. I'll handle Russo. I've been practicing lying for 3,000 years. I'm quite good at it by now. They sat together in comfortable silence, two beings who become one hybrid consciousness, anchoring a prison for something that shouldn't exist, on a planet neither of them had chosen but both would now protect. The stars wheeled overhead through the window, indifferent and eternal, and somewhere deep beneath the colony, the devourer of hours slept dreamlessly, held by locks made of paradox and shared memory. Alan felt Kalitha's contentment bleeding through their connection, the first peace she'd known in millennia. And she felt his quiet satisfaction, the sense of finally being useful, of mattering in some small way to the vast indifferent universe. Not bad for someone who just drank from a glowing pool, he said. Terrible decision, adequate outcome, Kalith agreed. Welcome to the rest of your very strange life, Alan Voss. Welcome to having company again, Kalith Vor.